The entire self-development industry is built on one promise, that you can create a better life than the one you currently have. But what if that's not true? What if every rise and fall is already part of the plan? Not something for you to try and control or change, but something for you to experience. See, a few weeks ago, I read a book called Butterflies Are Free to Fly, and it seriously made me question that belief. And for a while, I genuinely started believing that I may not actually be the creator of my life at all, and that everything is predetermined by something bigger. And at first, it actually felt relieving, until I realized that it was slowly killing my ambition. So in this video, I'd like to unpack the key ideas from the book, the mindset shift that made me almost give up on everything that I was working for, and the lesson that brought me back. And so the first concept the author talks about is the movie theater. And this analogy also positions his work and the teachings of this book against all other self-help methods, modalities, and approaches that even you may have come across so far. And the idea behind it is this. He basically compares living our lives to watching a movie on a screen inside a movie theater. And if you're familiar with the story of Plato's cave, you probably already know where we're going with this. And if you're not, just imagine that there's a huge movie theater, inside of which there are rows of seats behind and slightly above each other. And in front of the seats, there's a huge IMAX screen running all around the building, kind of like how the Sphere looks like in Las Vegas. And inside the theater, there are different types of people watching the movie, right? The first type of person is the one who sits tight in their chair. Both their arms and their legs are in shackles, so they're pretty much, it's almost like they're tied to their chair. Their head is facing strictly forward, and they are completely immersed in that experience. They are completely immersed in the movie that's being played out on the screen. And the author calls them human children, which has nothing to do with their actual human age and a lot more to do with their level of awareness or consciousness, I guess. Because these people completely identify with everything that's happening on the movie screen, which embodies the actual events that are taking place in their lives. And not only that, but they believe that they can change it. So they are completely immersed in it. And the author believes that they take up about 95% of humanity. So that's the majority of people. The second type of person inside the movie theater are people who recognize that although they are also tied down, those shackles are not actually super firm, which allows them to stand up, look around, and they realize that nothing bad happens. Now, why do they stand up in the first place? Well, because these are the people who had had enough of the movie that's being played on the screen. In other words, they are sick and tired of the events taking place in their lives, and they want to change them. So they go from human children who feel like they have no option other than to sit tight and just watch the clips being presented on the screen, to get up and walk out to the back of the theater to try to change things. And so this is important. They go from we can't change things to we must change things. So according to the author, they get up and they walk outside, but not completely out of the entire theater, just out to the back of the theater. And what happens there is they listen into the conversations of other, what he calls human adults, who are there because they are also fed up with the movies that are being presented on the screen. And so they also want to change the experience of their lives. And so in the back of the theater, small groups of people are formed based on their unique approach or method of changing things. So based on how they promise change. They created groups like the hippies in the 60s, different musical movements that intended to create a positive change through their uplifting lyrics, actual positive thinking groups, politicians, small splinter groups of religions, which are kind of like cults, activists, followers of groups that are based on altered states of consciousness, New Age methods, self-help groups. So whether you do Reiki or Ho'oponopono or EFT, everyone is catching a stray here, okay? He's shitting on everyone. Basically, he lists every approach that promises change now, right? Because that's the whole point. That's the reason people get up from their chairs, because they're sick and tired of their movies and they want to change their experience. They want to alter the way their life unfolds. And I want you to keep that in mind while we go into the second big concept that the author shares, which is the idea that our world is a hologram. First, he describes how actual holograms are made, like what's the technology behind them. And then he draws similarities and he brings up real-world studies and experiments that showcase that we might actually live inside a hologram. And my favorite ones are the ones where he discusses how in people with multiple different personalities, also known as multiples, there are some cases where there are certain conditions in one personality that are not present in another, inside the same human being. For example, a person in one personality might have to wear glasses, but when he switches to another personality, that one doesn't. Or how one personality gets skin rashes after, for example, consuming orange juice, but if they switch to another personality, that one doesn't. Or there are cases where someone is diabetic in one personality, but they're completely fine in another, which is completely crazy if you think about biology as this rigid field of science that always follows the same rules and principles and always performs the same exact way under every possible circumstance, right? But it does become possible if we accept the idea that we might actually live inside a hologram. And I can actually accept this too, because I read and heard about these examples from other credible sources as well. So nothing groundbreaking so far at all, as far as I'm concerned. But why the author believes this hologram was created in the first place is what's actually interesting to look at here. Because he's saying that this illusion called life on Earth was created by consciousness from the field of all possibilities. And he calls this consciousness our infinite I. Kind of like what other esoteric teachers and gurus might call our higher self, except he's saying that that would be an incorrect label because the word higher self suggests that it's something that you as a human being can eventually evolve into. However, an infinite I is not something that we can ever evolve into. It is consciousness and it is something that all of us have, but we are never going to become our infinite I. Instead, the way we have to think about it, according to the author, is this consciousness has infinite joy, infinite abundance, wisdom, and power, and it also has unconditional love and an infinite desire to play and express itself creatively. And because everything in this realm is so perfect, these conscious beings have a hard time challenging themselves and experiencing times when things aren't so happy and perfect. And that's the exact reason they wanted to create a hologram where even just temporarily they can play the game of limitation. And that is the key here. They wanted to experience what it's like to go to a theme park, in the words of the author, and experience what it's like when they don't get everything perfect all the time, or experience what it's like to not feel joy and happiness and freedom all the time, and instead feel emotions like grief, frustration, anger, being limited, etc., etc. So they created this game where they can experience limitation using characters called human players, right? Because they're infinite beings, they can't be limited, but what they can do is they can create characters in this game, which they are constantly in connection with, and using that connection, they can feel into what it's like to not be so perfect and not be so joyful all the time. And they call these characters human players, which is us. And then the author goes on to explain that there is no out there, meaning there's no objective reality outside of us. Instead, what happens is our infinite eyes download an Earth template into the brains of all human players, and we project that out there using our brains, and then we perceive that back and think of that as reality. Now, I'm not going to get into all the details of that and how it works exactly. You can actually pick up the book for free and read it for yourself if you want to. The point is, and what I was interested to hear was, according to the author, we, the human players, are not the creators of our experiences. And the reason for that is, this game is not about us. It's about them, meaning the infinite eyes, experiencing things they couldn't experience without us. And he uses a metaphor, which at first I thought was very interesting, but the more I bought into it, the more it almost ruined my life. So just stay with me as I'm unpacking this, okay? So the metaphor basically goes like this. Imagine a long bus where the bus driver at the front is your infinite I. It's the consciousness, the perfect being that created you, okay? And he's driving the bus through a scenery that's sometimes scary, sometimes amazing and stunning, sometimes it's less desirable. And you are the passenger sitting at the back of the bus, and your only job is to take it all in. You're not creating anything, you're just looking outside the window and just taking it all in, okay? You're marveling at things that you like, and you may show emotions of frustration when you see things that you don't like, right? Because that's what the game is about. And the author says that most people mess it up in life when they try to take over the bus driver's job, trying to steer the bus and decide where it should go instead of just enjoying the ride. Because according to him, not only is it not your job to steer the bus or create your own experiences, but you actually can't. He says your infinite I is the one creating everything down to the smallest detail in your life, and all your frustration comes from resisting that. You try to go this way when your infinite I, the consciousness that plays your character, wants you to experience something over there. And then he introduces the idea of two halves, meaning every human player's life has two parts to it. The first part is when they live like a human child or even a human adult, going back to our previous example, right? Because as a human child, you completely identify with everything that's happening on the screen inside a movie theater. As a human adult, you don't, but you try to change things, which is also the incorrect move, according to the author, simply because he says you can't. You simply don't have the power to. And he claims that the second part of every human player's life starts when they go inside their cocoon and they start going through an internal transformation, which results in them becoming a butterfly. Hence the name of the book, Butterflies Are Free to Fly. And for the rest of the book, he just walks you through a 6-step process to help you get rid of all your judgments in your life so you can stop calling things bad and start appreciating them instead. Because for your infinite I, even the messy, painful stuff is exciting. That's how an infinite being gets to experience limitation in this holographic game of life. He basically encourages you to stop giving things power outside of you. But what's interesting here is he doesn't say take your power back. Because again, according to him, you can't, because you don't have any kind of power to begin with, because you're not creating anything. Instead, you should just stop giving things power and get rid of all your judgments, all your ego and beliefs, and basically everything that makes you human. And then at the end of that process, you can become enlightened, which is the main message of this book. Now, if you actually want to move into your cocoon and start doing this process on a daily basis for years so you can eventually become enlightened, I guess you're more than welcome to do so. I don't really want to get into this in more details. Instead, I just want to quickly share with you how reading this book impacted me personally. Because he's very convincing when he lays out this philosophy and he brings all these examples and studies to prove that he is right. And not only that, but the way I read this book also contributed to its effect on me. Because what happened was, instead of reading the entire book at once and just forgetting about it, I only consumed maybe 1 or 2 chapters a day, every single day for an extended period of time. And so my unconscious mind had a lot of time to soak in all this information and to really meditate and ponder on it. And because I didn't really have any other inputs during that time period, I just worked and did my thing during the day and I was reading the book in the evening, I slowly started feeling like things were a little bit off. I started feeling really unmotivated and I started being not as disciplined as I was before that. And that really concerned me. So I asked myself, what's happening? Why do I feel this way? And I finally realized it was all happening due to this book because I didn't consume any other type of information to balance it out, unfortunately. And I was also really trying to read it with an open mind. And so I started buying into this idea more and more that I'm basically powerless as a human being. And it doesn't matter what I do or how much I try, I can't achieve anything. Because if what's written inside the book is true, then if my infinite I wants me to be more wealthy or more successful or go on more adventures, it's going to make it happen for me. If not, there's no point in even trying because again, as a human player, I'm completely powerless. Which sounds stupid, I know. Even me saying this right now, I realize just how silly that sounds, especially when you consider that everyone else in the self-development world, whether that's Abraham Hicks, the Law of Attraction, Joe Dispenza, Marissa Peers, everyone is talking about how you are the creator, or at least co-creator of your experience in life. Even I talked about this in my previous videos because it's true. I have evidence for this. Our mind is super powerful and using the right structure and the right intention, you can absolutely make huge things happen in your life. But the mind is also tricky, man. And that was probably the biggest lesson I learned through all of this is that whatever seed you plant in your mind, it grows. Whatever thoughts you pay attention to, it just gets bigger. And eventually, it's going to become the predominant lens through which you start seeing life. And that dictates everything else. How you show up in the world, what opportunities you notice or not notice, everything rises and falls on your mindset. And so after reading this book for a few weeks, it took an honest conversation with a close friend of mine who said, look, it sounds interesting, but it's BS. And you know it's BS because look at your life. Look at all the amazing things you've created. And you've helped others create as well. And after that conversation, I slowly came back to my senses and I realized he's right. We are creators. But I can truly appreciate the author's viewpoint as well, because it's a very interesting model to examine and look at, and maybe even to use when it comes to processing something devastating that happens in our lives. For example, accidents, because it's very comforting to believe that everything happens for a reason. But it's not a useful framework to live by on a daily basis if you're an ambitious person, someone who has huge goals to achieve and not a lot of time to waste. So there you go. I hope you learned a valuable lesson from my story. And I would still encourage you to read a lot of books and challenge your beliefs. Just be very careful who you listen to. One of the early red flags for me was when the author said that he was overweight, had all kinds of pains in his body, and only had $20 to his name at the time of writing this book when he was already 60-something years old. Not a good role model to follow. Whereas my mentor, the founder of the Superconscious movement, built 2 8-figure companies, and the people who follow him also created amazing end results, including myself. Some people founded schools, others attracted their dream partners or restored their health. I mean, there was someone who started seeing again after being legally blind for over 20 years, which is insane. It's just insane what we are capable of when we learn to truly tap into our mind's full potential. So if you're an entrepreneur or someone who wants to achieve big things in your life, but you're currently stuck, or you constantly find yourself trying to fix yourself and going on these detours instead of just sailing forward to your end results, then feel free to reach out to me and let's have a chat. I found that when I help people shift into a creative structure and remove their unconscious resistance towards what it is they want to create, not only can they predictively achieve it, they actually make it look effortless. So if you want my personal help with that, feel free to click on the first link in the description, book a call with me, and I'll see you in the next one.